The Culture Map by Erin Meyer. Picture this. You're Sabine Dulac, a talented French finance director who just landed the opportunity of a lifetime, a 2-year assignment in Chicago. You're absolutely thrilled. American business culture has always fascinated you. It's so practical, so efficient, so refreshingly transparent. You arrive, connect with your new team, and hit it off wonderfully with your boss, Jake. 4 months fly by, and then comes your first performance review. You walk out of that meeting practically floating on air. It was, without a doubt, the best performance review of your entire career. You finally feel recognized, appreciated, like you're truly coming into your own. Now let's peek behind the curtain at Jake's side of the story. He hangs up the phone with a heavy sigh. Someone just asked how his new French director is doing. His response? Sort of medium. Sure, she's got great energy, but he's genuinely worried. Her work is sloppy, she makes calculation errors, and she shows up to meetings unprepared. He's brought this up with her several times, but the message just isn't landing. He had her performance review this very morning and laid out the issues again. He sighs once more and says, "If she doesn't get in gear with these things, I honestly don't think this job is going to work out." Wait, what? How can two people leave the same meeting with completely opposite impressions? One person thinks she's crushing it, the other is preparing to let her go. This isn't about personality clash or bad chemistry. This is about culture, those invisible boundaries that shape our world, the unspoken rules dictating how we communicate, build trust, and get things done. Today we're exploring the brilliant work of someone who's dedicated her life to making these invisible boundaries visible. We're diving into The Culture Map by Erin Meyer. Erin Meyer is a professor at INSEAD, one of the world's most international business schools. Her classroom is basically a living laboratory, a beautiful, chaotic mix where executives from dozens of countries converge, bringing their unique cultural assumptions with them. For years, she's studied these interactions not just as a detached academic, but as someone living it every single day. She's an American in France, married to a Frenchman, raising bicultural children. From this fascinating vantage point, she's created a powerful framework of 8 simple scales that work like a map, helping us navigate the complex terrain of global business. This isn't just a book for CEOs running multinational corporations. This is for anyone who works with people from different backgrounds. It's for the student collaborating on a project with an international teammate. It's for the engineer on a video call with an overseas supplier. It's for you right now, living in a world that's more connected than ever before. Here's my promise. By the end of our time together, you'll have a completely new lens for seeing the world. You'll understand why an American might seem friendly without actually being your friend, why a German colleague's bluntness is respect rather than rudeness, and why your Japanese partners take forever to make decisions but then execute them at lightning speed. You'll gain a map that transforms cultural misunderstandings into moments of genuine connection and insight. So let's begin our journey and break through the invisible boundaries of our global world. Have you ever felt like you were speaking the same language as someone, but somehow just not communicating? You say one thing, they hear something completely different. The story of Sabine and her American boss is a perfect, if painful, example. She heard praise, he delivered a warning. The disconnect wasn't in their words. It was in the cultural context behind them. This is the first, and perhaps most fundamental, scale on our culture map: communication. Erin Meyer explains that cultures communicate along a spectrum. On one end, you have low-context cultures. On the other, high-context cultures. In a low-context culture, think the United States, Australia, or the Netherlands, good communication is precise, simple, and crystal clear. Messages are expressed and understood at face value. Repetition is actually appreciated if it helps clarify the message. Here's the key. The responsibility for understanding rests squarely on the speaker's shoulders. As an American teacher might say what you mean and mean what you say. Or, remember the classic presentation rule. Tell them what you're going to tell them. Then tell them what you've told them. It's all about clarity and being explicit. Now contrast that with a high-context culture, like Japan, China, Iran, or Brazil. Here, good communication is sophisticated, nuanced, and layered. Messages are often implied rather than plainly expressed. You have to read between the lines. The responsibility for understanding is shared between speaker and listener. It's a dance, where much of the meaning exists in what's not said. A few years ago, a popular new word in Japan was KY, which stands for kuki yomenai. It literally means one who cannot read the air. In Japan, if you can't read the air, you're not a good communicator. Think of a long married couple. After 50 years together, they can communicate volumes with just a glance or a subtle shift in tone. They have a massive amount of shared context. A newlywed couple, however, needs to be much more explicit to avoid misunderstandings. Low-context cultures are like newlyweds. High-context cultures are like that old married couple. The United States, a young country built by immigrants from everywhere, had to develop a low-context communication style. There was very little shared history or understanding, so if you wanted to get a message across, you had to spell it out. Japan, an ancient and homogeneous island nation, developed a high-context culture over thousands of years of shared experience. This difference creates all kinds of confusion. Meyer shares a personal story about a training session in Paris with a Chinese country expert named Bo Chen. She'd asked him to prepare business examples to share. The session began, and Meyer presented her points, pausing after each one to give Chen a chance to jump in. But he remained completely silent. He didn't speak, didn't lean forward, didn't even raise an eyebrow. 3 hours went by, and Meyer started to panic. Had he not prepared? Was he shy? Finally, in desperation, she directly asked him, "Bo, did you have any examples you'd like to share?" To her astonishment, Chen sat up, smiled confidently, opened a notebook filled with typed notes, and said, "Thank you, Erin. I do." He then proceeded to share one brilliant, fascinating example after another. Later, Meyer asked why he hadn't spoken up sooner. His answer was a masterclass in high-context, hierarchical culture. He explained, "In this room, Erin is the chairman of the meeting. As she is the senior person, I wait for her to call on me. And while I'm waiting, I should show I'm a good listener by keeping both my voice and my body quiet." He also noted that Westerners tend to speak on top of each other, leaving no space for a more patient communicator to enter the conversation. He was waiting for a respectful pause that, from his perspective, never came. For Meyer, the silence meant, "I have nothing to say." For Chen, the silence meant, "I'm listening respectfully and waiting for my turn." This is the danger of not being able to read the air. This brings us to our second scale, which is closely related but distinctly different: evaluating. This scale deals with how we give feedback, particularly negative feedback, and this is where Sabine's story gets its explanation. You might assume that low-context cultures are always direct with feedback, and high-context cultures are always indirect, but it's not that simple. The French, for instance, are a high-context culture. They communicate with nuance and subtext. But when it comes to negative feedback, they can be incredibly direct. Americans, on the other hand, are the lowest context culture in the world. yet they have a famously indirect way of delivering criticism. This creates our first four-quadrant map, combining the communicating and evaluating scales. In one corner, you have low context and direct feedback. These are cultures like the Netherlands, Germany, and Denmark. Here, feedback is given bluntly and honestly, often without any positive padding. Words like totally, absolutely, and strongly are used to make sure the message isn't misunderstood. To a Dutch manager, this directness is a gift. It's a sign of honesty and respect for your professionalism. They separate the feedback from the person. The idea can be challenged, but it's not a personal attack. Then you have high context and direct feedback. This is the quadrant of France, Spain, and Russia. Here, people speak with nuance, but when it's time for criticism, it can come out sharp and strong. In France, spirited debate is seen as a sign of engagement. Challenging ideas is how you test their strength and arrive at excellence. The problem for outsiders is that this direct criticism can feel deeply personal, especially if you're not used to it. Next is the quadrant of low context and indirect feedback. This is where the United States, the UK, and Canada reside. This is the home of the feedback sandwich. American managers are taught to wrap negative feedback between layers of positive encouragement. They use soft, downgrading words like maybe, a little, or sort of. They'll say, "That's a great start. I really like your energy on this. There are just a few minor details we might want to think about, but overall, excellent work." This is exactly what happened to Sabine. Her American boss, Jake, thought he was delivering a clear message. He probably said 3 positive things for every 1 negative point. For Sabine, coming from a culture where positive feedback is rare and negative feedback is direct, his praise rang loud and clear, while the criticism sounded like a trivial afterthought. She heard, quote, "Excellent, excellent, excellent, tiny suggestion," and walked away feeling like a superstar. He thought he was being diplomatic. She thought he was being dishonest. Finally, we have high context and indirect feedback. This is the quadrant of Japan, China, Thailand, and Indonesia. Here, negative feedback is given with extreme subtlety. It's often implied, and almost never given in front of a group, as that would cause a tremendous loss of face or public reputation. Disagreement is expressed so softly you might miss it entirely. Instead of saying no, a colleague might say, "It will be very difficult, but I will do my best." The real message is, this is not going to happen. So how do we navigate this minefield? Meyer offers some simple but powerful advice. When working with cultures that are more direct than yours, don't try to mimic them. You'll likely get it wrong and come across as rude. Instead, learn to accept their feedback without taking it personally. And when you give feedback, be aware that you might need to be more explicit than you're used to. If you're working with more indirect cultures, especially those from the last quadrant, the rules are different. Never give negative feedback to an individual in front of a group, and learn the art of blurring the message. You might give feedback slowly, over a period of time. You might do it over a meal or a drink, in a relaxed setting, to soften the blow. Or you might only mention the positive parts, with the unspoken understanding that the parts you don't mention are the ones that need work. The lesson here is that politeness is in the eye of the beholder. What feels like honest, constructive criticism in one culture can feel like a brutal personal attack in another. Understanding where you and your colleagues fall on these two scales is the first step to communicating effectively. Now, once we understand how we communicate, the next question is, how do we persuade? How do we convince others that our ideas have merit? This brings us to the third scale on our map, persuading. Meyer identifies two main styles of reasoning, principles first and applications first. Principles first reasoning, sometimes called deductive reasoning, starts with a general principle or theory and then moves to a practical conclusion. You first explain the why, and only then do you get to the how. For example, you might start with the principle, all men are mortal. Then you state the fact, Socrates is a man. From there, you logically conclude, therefore Socrates is mortal. Cultures in France, Italy, Germany, and Russia tend to favor this approach. Their education systems train them to first understand the theory before applying it. A French manager once told Meyer that in school they had to calculate the value of pi as a class before they were allowed to use it in a formula. On the other side of the scale is applications. First, reasoning, or inductive reasoning. This approach starts with real-world observations and facts, and from there, a general conclusion is drawn. You focus on the how first, and the why comes later, if at all. If you visit Minnesota in January 100 times, and every time it's freezing cold, you induce the general principle, Minnesota winters are cold. Anglo-Saxon cultures like the United States, the UK, and Australia are strongly applications first. Their education systems emphasize practical application over abstract theory. The famous case study method used in American business schools is a perfect example of applications-first thinking. Students read a real-life business story and then extract general lessons from it. This difference in reasoning style can lead to massive frustration. Meyer tells the story of Kara Williams, an American engineer working for a German auto company. She was an expert in her field and had to present her recommendations to a group of German directors. Being a good applications-first thinker, she got straight to the point. She started her presentation with her key recommendations. Before she could even finish her first slide, a German director interrupted her. "How did you get to these conclusions? You're giving us your recommendations, but I don't understand how you got here." Another chimed in, "Please explain what methodology you used." Kara was completely thrown. She felt they were attacking her credibility and showing a lack of respect. Why were they questioning her expertise? From her perspective, her job was to provide the answer, not to walk them through every step of how she found it. The presentation went downhill from there, and her recommendations were rejected. Her German colleagues weren't trying to be difficult. They were principles-first thinkers. For them, a conclusion is only credible if the reasoning and methodology behind it are sound. You can't just swallow an argument without first understanding its foundation. They felt she was treating them like they were stupid, expecting them to accept her ideas without any proof. For Kara, getting to the point quickly was a sign of efficiency. For the Germans, it was a sign of sloppy thinking. The key to persuading a principles-first audience is to spend more time setting the context and explaining your methodology before you get to your conclusion. And if they challenge you, don't see it as an attack. See it as a sign of engagement. They're testing the robustness of your argument, which is actually a compliment. When persuading an applications-first audience, do the opposite. Get straight to the point. Start with your main recommendation. They'll ask for the background details if they need them. A French manager learned this the hard way when his British colleagues kept ignoring his long, carefully crafted emails. He wrote them in the classic French dialectic style: thesis, antithesis, synthesis. He would build up his argument, address potential counter-arguments, and then finally arrive at his conclusion in the last paragraph. His British colleagues, however, would read the first paragraph, see no clear point, and move the email to their read later folder, which of course meant read never. A colleague finally told him, "If your email doesn't fit on the screen of an iPhone, it risks not getting read." But there's a fascinating twist to this scale. When we look at Asian cultures, we find a completely different pattern of thinking that doesn't fit neatly on the principles first or applications first spectrum. This is holistic thinking. Western thought, influenced by Aristotle, tends to be specific. We can remove an object from its environment and analyze it in isolation. A piece of wood floating has the property of levity. A rock falling has the property of gravity. We focus on the object itself. Asian thought, influenced by Taoism and Confucianism, is more holistic. It focuses on the interconnectedness of things. An object can only be understood in relation to its environment or the field in which it exists. Action always occurs in a field of forces. Think of yin and yang, two seemingly opposite forces that are actually interdependent and interconnected. Meyer illustrates this with a remarkable study by Professor Richard Nisbett. He showed American and Japanese participants short animated videos of an underwater scene. When asked what they saw, the Americans almost always mentioned the biggest, brightest, fastest-moving fish in the foreground. The Japanese, on the other hand, were more likely to talk about the background, the plants, the water, the smaller animals. They also made twice as many comments about the relationship between the foreground and the background. In another study, when asked to take a photo of a person, Americans took a close-up of the face. The Japanese took a photo that showed the person in their environment, with the human figure often being quite small. For the American, the photo was of a person. For the Japanese, you can't understand a person without seeing them in their context. This macro-to-micro thinking shows up everywhere. The Chinese write an address starting with the country, then the province, then the city, and finally the street. Westerners do the opposite. The Chinese put the surname first, then the given name. Again, the opposite. When Meyer was teaching a group of Chinese executives, she noticed a pattern. She would ask a specific question, and they would respond by talking about something that seemed completely unrelated. They would discuss their experiences in Hungary, or the role of hierarchy in their company, or the behavior of young people in the tech industry. For several minutes it seemed they were completely ignoring the question. But then, after exploring all this contextual information, they would loop back and connect it all to the original question, arriving at a conclusion. For a Western specific thinker, this can feel inefficient and confusing. Just get to the point, we want to scream. But for a holistic thinker, you can't get to the point without first understanding the big picture. All the pieces are connected, and to ignore the context is to misunderstand the problem. This means that when you're trying to persuade, manage, or motivate someone from a holistic culture, you'll be far more effective if you take the time to explain the big picture and show how all the pieces fit together. Don't just assign a task. Explain how that task connects to the team's goal, the department's mission, and the company's vision. Our styles of communication and persuasion are deeply tied to how we view power and authority. This leads us to our next two interconnected scales, leading and deciding. The leading scale measures the degree of respect and deference shown to authority figures. It runs from egalitarian to hierarchical. This is what the famous researcher Geert Hofstede called power distance. In egalitarian cultures like Denmark, Sweden, or the Netherlands, the ideal distance between a boss and a subordinate is low. The boss is a facilitator among equals. It's okay to disagree with them openly. You can skip hierarchical levels, emailing your boss's boss without a problem. People often call each other by their first names, regardless of rank. The aura of authority comes from acting like one of the team. Meyer tells the story of Ulrik Jepsen, a Danish manager who was incredibly successful in his home country. He didn't have an office. He sat in an open space with his team. He dressed casually and encouraged everyone, from interns to directors, to voice their opinions. His motto was to push power down and get out of the way. Then he was promoted to run his company's new operation in Russia. He was completely baffled by his team's behavior. They called him Mr. President. They deferred to all his opinions. They were reluctant to take any initiative without his approval. They treated him like royalty. All problems were pushed up to him for a decision. When he told his IT director, "You're the expert, you decide," the director was paralyzed. Jepsen was groaning about his team's lack of initiative, while his team was wringing their hands about his lack of leadership. They saw him as weak and incompetent. Russia, like many countries in Asia, Latin America, and Africa, is a hierarchical culture. Here, the ideal distance between a boss and a subordinate is high. The boss is a strong director who leads from the front. Status is important. You show respect by deferring to the boss's opinion, especially in public. Communication follows the hierarchical chain. An aura of authority comes from setting yourself apart. These differences have deep historical roots. The egalitarianism of Scandinavia can be traced back to the Vikings, who surprisingly had a very democratic culture. When an envoy was sent to negotiate with them, he returned confused, complaining, "I couldn't figure out who to talk with. They said they were all the chiefs." The hierarchical nature of Southern Europe is linked to the influence of the Roman Empire, with its highly structured social and political systems. And the strong hierarchies in East Asia are deeply influenced by the teachings of Confucius, who believed that societal harmony depends on everyone understanding their rank and acting accordingly. In a Confucian society, the boss has a paternalistic responsibility to protect and care for their subordinates, and in return, the subordinates owe the boss their loyalty and obedience. This leads to the next scale, deciding which measures whether decisions are made in a consensual or a top-down manner. Now, you might assume that egalitarian cultures are always consensual, and hierarchical cultures are always top-down, and for the most part, you'd be right. Sweden is extremely egalitarian, and one of the most consensual societies in the world. Meyer tells a funny story about working with a Swedish boss who would send an email to the team suggesting a date for a meeting. What followed was an endless chain of replies as everyone weighed in, debated the topic, and slowly, ever so slowly, reached a group agreement. For an American, this can feel painfully inefficient. Hierarchical cultures like Morocco or Korea tend to be top-down. The boss makes the decision. But here's where it gets really interesting. There are two major exceptions to this rule: the United States and Germany. The United States is one of the most egalitarian cultures on the leading scale. But when it comes to decision-making, it's surprisingly top-down. The American ethos values speed and individualism. Consensus, as one American business speaker said, is a four-letter word. In an American company, the boss might solicit input from the team, but it's generally understood that he or she will make the final call. And once the decision is made, the expectation is that everyone gets on board and moves to action. United we stand, divided we fall. Germany, on the other hand, is a hierarchical culture. There's a formal distance between the boss and the subordinate. Yet, it has a strongly consensual decision-making style. German companies often spend a great deal of time discussing an issue, soliciting input from all stakeholders, and building a group agreement. This leads to one of the most brilliant concepts in the book: the difference between a decision with a capital D and a decision with a lowercase d. In a consensual culture like Germany or Japan, the decision-making process is long and drawn out. But once the decision is made, it's final. It's a commitment. Implementation is rapid because everyone has already bought in. The decision is written in stone. This is a capital D decision. In a top-down culture like the United States, the decision-making process is very quick. The boss can make a decision in a matter of minutes, but this decision is flexible. It's a lowercase d decision. As new information comes in, or as the team starts to implement it and runs into problems, the decision can be revisited and changed. The process is one of decide, test, revise, test, again. Implementation can be slow and rocky because the buy-in isn't fully there from the beginning. Meyer describes a German-American merger that was plagued by this misunderstanding. The German team was horrified by their American colleagues. They would have a meeting, the Americans would say, "Great, we've made a decision," and the Germans would go off and work diligently for weeks to implement it. Then, an American manager would casually change his mind. "I've been thinking about it, and I think we should go in a different direction." The Germans were furious. They felt the Americans were untrustworthy and couldn't stick to a promise. The Americans were equally frustrated. They saw the Germans as rigid and inflexible. "It takes them weeks to make a decision," one American complained, "and once it is made, they cling to it with their lives. But the world is dynamic. We need to be able to adapt." Neither side was right or wrong. They were just operating with different systems. For the Americans, a decision was just a marker of progress, a temporary agreement to move forward. For the Germans, a decision was the final, irreversible conclusion of a long process. Japan is another fascinating case. It's one of the most hierarchical cultures, but also one of the most consensual. This is achieved through the famous Ringi system. A proposal often starts at the mid-management level. It's discussed and debated, and a consensus is formed. Then, a document, the Ringisho, is passed around, and everyone puts their stamp of approval on it. Once it has full agreement at one level, it moves up to the next level for the same process. This continues all the way to the top. By the time a decision is made, everyone in the organization has had a chance to give input and is on board. The process of informal, behind-the-scenes consensus building is called nimawashi, which literally means root binding, preparing the roots of a tree before transplanting it to avoid damage. This system protects the organization from the damage of internal disagreement. Understanding these systems is crucial. If you're working with a consensual culture, be patient. The process will be slow, but implementation will be fast. If you're working with a top-down culture, expect quick decisions, but be prepared for them to change. The most important thing is to make the process explicit. At the start of a project, have a discussion. How are we going to make decisions on this team? Will it be by vote? Will the boss decide after a discussion? Is a decision final or flexible? Just having that conversation can prevent a world of frustration. All of these interactions, how we communicate, persuade, lead, and decide, rest on a foundation of trust. But how we build that trust is, yet again, deeply cultural. This brings us to the trusting scale. Meyer distinguishes between two types of trust: cognitive trust and affective trust. Cognitive trust comes from the head. It's based on confidence in someone's skills, accomplishments, and reliability. You see their work, you see they're competent and consistent, and so you trust them. This is task-based trust. Affective trust comes from the heart. It arises from feelings of emotional closeness, empathy, and friendship. You share meals, you laugh together, you get to know each other on a personal level. You feel an emotional bond, and so you trust them. This is relationship-based trust. Every culture uses both types of trust. You trust your spouse because of an affective bond. You trust your surgeon because of their cognitive skill. But in the business world, cultures have a strong preference for one over the other. In task-based cultures like the United States, Germany, or Australia, trust is built through business-related activities. Work relationships are built and dropped easily, based on practicality. You do good work, you're reliable, I trust you. The line between a professional relationship and a personal friendship is kept sharp and clear. Mixing the two is often seen as unprofessional. In relationship-based cultures like Brazil, China, Nigeria, or Saudi Arabia, trust is built through sharing meals, evening drinks, and personal time. Work relationships build up slowly over the long term. Cognitive and affective trust are woven together. Here, business is personal. The relationship is the contract. Meyer tells the story of a merger negotiation between a Brazilian company, Gerdau, and an American company. The first meetings were in Mississippi. The American team got straight down to business, ordering in sandwiches for lunch and working late. They felt the meetings were incredibly efficient and productive. They were showing respect by not wasting the Brazilians' time. The Brazilian team, however, left feeling uneasy. We didn't know whether we could trust them, one of them explained. We spent 2 days together, but we didn't know who they were as people. The next meetings were in Brazil. The days were filled with meetings, but the meals were long, stretching late into the evening with good food and conversation. Now it was the Americans who were uncomfortable. They kept looking at their watches, worried they wouldn't finish their work. They wondered if the Brazilians were taking the negotiations seriously. They didn't understand that for the Brazilians, the long meals were the most important part of the work. It was their way of saying, "We want to get to know you, to build a personal connection. This is how we build the trust we need to do business together." This difference is often described using the analogy of a peach versus a coconut. Peach cultures, like the United States or Brazil, are soft on the outside. People are friendly and open with strangers. They smile, they share personal information quickly. But once you get past that soft outer layer, you hit the hard pit in the middle. Friendliness doesn't equal friendship. An American might share their life story with you on an airplane, but at the end of the flight, they'll say, "Nice to meet you," and you'll never see them again. This can feel fake or hypocritical to someone from a coconut culture. Coconut cultures like Russia, Germany, or France are hard on the outside. People are more closed off with strangers. They don't smile as much, and they don't share personal information easily. It takes time and effort to break through that hard outer shell. But if you do, they become warm, loyal friends for life. So how do you build trust across these divides? The general rule is that investing in relationship building will almost always pay off. Even if you're working with another task-based culture, when you're working with a relationship-based culture, it's not optional. It's essential. Share meals. Go out for drinks. In Japan, the culture of communication, a blend of the Japanese word for drink and communication, is a vital part of business. It's in the informal, after-hours settings that real thoughts are shared and connections are forged. Dare to show your real self, not just your professional persona. In many cultures, the willingness to be vulnerable and authentic is what builds the deepest trust. And remember why this is so important, especially in emerging markets. In a country with a highly reliable legal system, you can do business with someone you don't know because the contract protects you. If they don't pay, you can take them to court. But in a country where the legal system is less reliable, the personal relationship is your only safety net. The relationship is the contract. Finally, we arrive at our last scale, scheduling, which looks at how we perceive and manage time. This runs from linear time to flexible time. In linear time cultures like Germany, Japan, Switzerland, and the United States, Time is seen as a finite resource that can be saved, spent, or wasted. Project steps are approached in a sequential fashion, one thing at a time. The focus is on the deadline and sticking to the schedule. Punctuality is paramount. A meeting has a clear agenda. It starts on time, and it ends on time. Interruptions are seen as rude and unprofessional. In flexible time cultures like India, Nigeria, Brazil, and Saudi Arabia, time is more fluid. Project steps are approached in a fluid manner. Many things are dealt with at once, and interruptions are accepted. The focus is on adaptability. Plans can and will change. The relationship is more important than the schedule. Meyer shares a story of giving a presentation in Denver, where the organizer held up cards every 10 minutes, counting down to a big black 0 that meant your time is up. A few days later in Brazil, she was scheduled to speak for 45 minutes. Her host told her, "Please feel free to take more time if you like." She took 65 minutes and felt bad for going over. Her host approached her afterward and said, "It was great, but you ended so early." For the American organizer, good customer service meant respecting the schedule to the minute. For the Brazilian host, good customer service meant being flexible enough to meet the needs and interests of the audience, regardless of the clock. This difference shows up in the simplest of ways. In Stockholm, people form a neat, orderly queue for the bus, and cutting in line is a cardinal sin. It's a linear process. In India, a line is more like an evergreen tree, with branches sprouting off the main trunk as people create their own parallel lines. Or it can be a swarm, where the person at the counter tends to multiple customers at once. For a linear time person, this looks like chaos. For a flexible time person, it's just a more fluid and adaptable way of getting things done. A Nigerian manager trying to schedule meetings with his German colleagues captured the frustration perfectly. The Germans wanted to plan their conference calls 6 months in advance. The Nigerian manager explained, "How can I be expected to know today, in January, what I'm going to want to eat for dinner on April 6th? In my country, we don't even know when a holiday will start until the supreme leader looks at the moon and says the holiday starts now." The key to managing this scale is adaptability. When you're in a linear time culture, be punctual. When you're in a flexible time culture, be patient and adaptable. But if you're leading a multicultural team, the most effective strategy is to create your own team culture. Have an explicit conversation at the beginning of a project. How will we run our meetings? How will we handle punctuality? What are our expectations around deadlines? By setting clear, shared ground rules, you create a third way that everyone can agree to, avoiding the constant friction of competing cultural norms. These 8 scales, communicating, evaluating, persuading, leading, deciding, trusting, disagreeing, and scheduling, form our culture map. They're not meant to put people in boxes. We're all individuals. But they provide a powerful framework for understanding, for decoding the subtle influences that shape our interactions. They help us see the water we swim in, and once we can see it, we can learn to navigate it with more grace, more understanding, and more success. As we come to the end of our journey through the culture map, what's the one big idea we should carry with us? For me, it's a simple but profound realization. Most cross-cultural misunderstandings don't happen because people are malicious. They happen because we're all, in a sense, blind. We're like fish who don't know they're in water. Our own culture is so deeply ingrained in us that it feels like common sense. We assume that the way we communicate, the way we build trust, the way we make decisions, is just normal. And so when someone from another culture behaves differently, our first instinct is often to judge them. We see them as inefficient, or dishonest, or disrespectful, or disorganized. What Erin Meyer gives us with this book is the gift of sight. She gives us a vocabulary and a framework to understand these differences not as character flaws, but as different, equally valid ways of seeing the world. A German's direct feedback isn't rude. It's a sign of objective respect. A Japanese team's long, slow decision-making process isn't inefficient. It's a deeply ingrained method for building lasting commitment. An American's quick, friendly smile isn't a promise of deep friendship. It's simply a different cultural norm for interacting with strangers. The true power of this book isn't just in helping us avoid embarrassing mistakes or close more international deals. It's in the way it fosters empathy. It encourages us to pause before we judge. It prompts us to ask, what if their common sense is just different from my common sense? That single question can transform a moment of frustration into a moment of learning and connection. In our increasingly polarized world, this skill is more important than ever. The ability to see a situation from multiple perspectives, to understand that there isn't always one right way, is a form of wisdom. It's what allows us to build bridges instead of walls. So how can you start applying these ideas today? Here are a few simple things you can try. First, just start observing. Pick one of the 8 scales that resonated with you the most. Maybe it's the difference between task-based and relationship-based trust. For the next week, just pay attention to how that shows up in your life. Notice it in movies, in news reports, in your online interactions. Just building your awareness is a huge first step. Second, the next time you feel a surge of frustration when dealing with someone, whether it's a colleague, a customer, or even a family member with a different background, take a breath and ask yourself that magic question. Could a cultural difference be at play here? Instead of assuming they have bad intentions, get curious. This simple mental shift can change everything. And third, practice what Meyer calls framing. If you know your style might be misinterpreted, explain it. You could say something like, "In my culture, we often debate ideas very directly. Please know that if I challenge your idea, it's a sign that I'm interested, not that I'm criticizing you personally." A few words of explanation can provide the context that others need to understand your behavior correctly. Ultimately, the culture map is not just a guide to global business. It's a guide to being a more thoughtful, effective, and empathetic human being in a complex and interconnected world. It teaches us that while we're all fundamentally the same, our cultural programming makes us beautifully, fascinatingly different. And learning to navigate those differences is one of the most valuable skills we can acquire. That was a summary of The Culture Map by Erin Meyer. We've touched on the key ideas and stories today, but I'll be honest with you. A summary is like looking at a map of a beautiful city. It can show you the layout, but it can't let you feel the energy of the streets, smell the food from a local cafe, or hear the music drifting from an open window. The real magic happens when you explore the city for yourself. This summary is designed to help you decide if this particular journey is one you want to take. If anything we've talked about has sparked your curiosity or made you see your own interactions in a new light, I encourage you to grab a copy of the book. Reading it isn't just about learning concepts. It's about gaining a new perspective that can genuinely change the way you connect with the world. You can find a link to the book in the description below. Also, if you found this summary valuable, I'd be so grateful if you could take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It lets me know that these journeys are helpful for you, and it ensures you won't miss our next exploration into another life-changing book. Let's keep learning and growing together.